friends, welcome to this module on Introduction to JSP. Earlier we have used servlets in our web applications. Fine. The way we have used servlets is servlets have their own life cycle, fine, in which they get initialized, and after initialization a regular invocation, whenever there is a request coming from a client, we have the regular invocation of a service method which receives the servlet request and the servlet response objects, and then within the service method, fine, the normal thing which we are doing is we are extracting the from the servlet response object, we are extracting the print writer, and then on this writer we write the output which is to be sent to the client, and this output normally is some kind of an HTML. Fine. So, it is like the HTML which is the output which is to be sent to the client is something which is the task normally for a web page designer. It is not the task of a programmer. Fine. It is a task which is more well done by a web page designer. So, this kind of a task which is normally for web page design, it is nothing but full of out.println, and then in double quotes you may be just writing out HTML tags, right. Now, what we have here is instead of the programmer having to write all the HTML tags in double quotes and writing a Java file with a servlet in which he is saying okay, he is just having almost similar things for rest of the part, but as far as the service method is concerned, within the service method he has got the out.println, and in double quotes it is all about writing HTML, or maybe in some places there might be some other kinds of things to be some expressions to be written out. Okay. So, instead of doing all this, fine, suppose we take this give this task of creating the HTML tags and everything to a web page designer, and he gives us a good HTML page. Then maybe we desire something like this, that yes, let there be some utility which can read the HTML for me, convert it into a Java file which is a servlet, and then compile it and then use it like a servlet. Okay. This is exactly what is available to us in our web container. Our web container has what we call as a JSP engine. What the JSP engine does is, yes, it is translating, you can give it a JSP file, we call it a JSP file. A JSP file is not a Java file, fine. A JSP file is full of all the tags, the output which you want to see, fine. And what the JSP engine does is, it does the task, it has this task of converting or translating rather your JSP file into a Java file which is an equivalent servlet. JSPs are servlets, they are special kind of a servlets. Like servlets have a life cycle, even JSPs have their own life cycle, fine. So, what can a JSP contain? A JSP can contain anything which is normally going in any kind of an HTML file. You can pick up an HTML file, rename it as .jsp, and if you have it as part of your web application, and if you access it just like an HTML, right, you just accessing any other resource. If you access in JSP, the JSP engine would come into picture. It would then do the task of translation of our JSP into a servlet, and then into a Java file, fine, and that Java file is also getting compiled, and then it is used like a servlet, fine. After compilation, it will be used like a servlet. The translated Java file is nothing but it is a servlet, kind of an extension of a servlet. Okay. So, we do have actually we have a separate API, like we have a API for servlet, there is also a API for JSP, fine. We have this package called javax.servlet.jsp, and that does contain a few things, like it contains JSP, we have JSP page as one of the interfaces available in this package. We have interfaces called we have a general interface called JSP page, and there is one specific interface called HTTP JSP page. Fine. So, the translation is into one of these, and the JSP page is actually extending from servlet. So, JSP is nothing but it is a special kind of a servlet. As far as coding is concerned, no, we do not have to write a Java code here. We have to simply write more of from the point of view of output. We just see, okay, this is the output which I want to have, right, and from that point of view just create a web page and you can give it as a JSP. Let us see what kind of elements can go in a JSP. A JSP can contain everything which can go in a HTML. Fine. It can contain all the HTML tags, like someone says, okay, can we include JavaScript? Okay, is JavaScript allowed in HTML? Yes. Okay, so fine. Anything which is allowed in HTML is allowed in JSP. It is like this. Over and above whatever is available for HTML, okay, we have certain additional things which can also be included in a JSP. Fine, because ultimately what is happening is, if we just put everything which is valid for HTML, it just gets translated into a service method. Fine, where within the service method out.println in double quotes everything whatever we decided as whatever is a valid HTML, valid for HTML. Now, then what happens? Now, over and above this, we can also our JSP, fine, includes more kinds of elements. It is not just the elements available for HTML. JSP can have has its own additional elements. For example, it has something called expressions. Fine, an expression would be written with less than percentage equal to, and then you can put any kind of a Java expression and end it with a percentage greater than. Fine. So, we have an expression, a Java expression which can be included within a JSP. Now, what is the effect of an expression, a JSP scripting element called expression? The JSP scripting element expression can be used to include any kind of it can be used to include any kind of expression, Java expression in the output. Fine. Okay. Now, for this, what is it that I can use here in my expression? What kind of expressions can I, what kind of objects can I use for having my Java expression? Someone says, oh, I want to have a date. Fine, you want to create the object of java.util.date and print it out, or you do not have to say I want to print something. Fine. Anyway, whatever we write in JSP is actually meant for, most of it is meant for output, right, because it's all HTML. Now, within this, everything which is meant for output, we are putting an expression. That means, this is also meant for output. So, we do not have to explicitly say I want this expression to be printed out. Just put the expression, a Java expression. So, for example, someone says less than percentage equal to, and then says new java.util.date, fine, calls a constructor and then ends the expression with the percentage greater than. So, if he does this, if he includes this, okay, in the output what is going to go is, okay, everything whatever is before this plus whatever is the output generated by whatever is the current date time, that is what we get when we call the construct, when we create a date object. So, it will just do a out.println for the new java.util.date. Fine. Okay. So, we have this thing like we can include expressions. Fine. If you look at the translation point of view, from the translation point of view, earlier I mentioned that when we translate it into a Java file, a JSP gets translated to a Java file, all the HTML gets converted into out.println and in double quotes it goes there. In case there is an expression, fine, the content of the expression, whatever the Java expression which you have included in the scripting element, fine, it gets translated into out.println and then whatever straight away that expression is included. Okay. Fine. So, this is one kind of a scripting element. We have one script, the first scripting element which we have seen is the expression which can be included in a JSP page. Another scripting element which can go in a JSP page. Fine. When it is getting translated, when it is getting translated, it is all about output, out.println, out.println, but sometimes you might like to put some, maybe there is something which you would like to put in a loop. Fine. You would like to repeat something, you would like to repeat output of certain part maybe 5 times, fine, or fine. So, how do I do it? In JSP, we do not have any such provision in HTML, right? We will have to repeat it, we will have to put that HTML 5 times. Okay. So, instead of putting that HTML 5 times, you would think about when the translation is happening, it says out.println. Could I have a provision of making it have a for loop for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus, fine, and then that out.println in double quotes whatever is my HTML, and then I have something to end my for loop also, right. So, can I have some such things included? So, that means you want to ask the JSP engine that when you do the translation, you please include this as a Java code segment. I would like to include some Java code segment within the translated code which you are generating, which is going to go as part of the service method. So, in the output, fine, you would in the service method, which is the translated service method, you would like to include something like a for loop or any code segment, any Java code segment, fine, not as a out.println alone, right. It may be anything else. So, for that reason, what we have here in JSPs, we have a scripting element called scriptlet. So, we have scriptlet as a scripting element. A scriptlet is written as less than percentage, there is no other thing like equal to anything, no other symbol, less than percentage, and then you can include any valid Java code segment and end it with a percentage greater than. So, if you do this, fine, this will be in the translation, this will simply be embedded as it is, fine. There is no out.println or any such things happening with the scriptlet. So, scriptlet could be used for embedding some Java code within your service method, fine. So, within service method, for example, what I could be doing here, I could I have some HTML, valid HTML, and then I will say less than percentage, I start a scriptlet, and then I say for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus, end of bracket, semicolon, and then I end my scriptlet here, fine. So, it is just a small code which I am putting, and then I put some more HTML code after this, and once I am finished with the HTML code which I want to repeat 5 times, I will put again another scriptlet, fine, which says less than percentage. There is only one thing in that scriptlet, that is end of the for loop. So, I have the closing braces for this, and a scriptlet is ended there with the percentage greater than. So, if I include this, yes, in the translation what is going to happen is, yes, there is out.println for all the things before the scriptlet, and then we will have the for statement which we inserted in the scriptlet, and then there will be out.println repeated for the portion which is not a scriptlet, and then we have the scriptlet which is going to end the for loop, and then it will continue with the out.println for rest of the HTML part. So, that what will be happening when the final output is generated to the client? The final output which goes to the client will have that portion repeated 5 times, because we have a for loop included like this. So, the idea here is we can, if we can visualize the translation, fine, you should be able to easily include scriptlets within your JSP, fine. So, scriptlets are nothing but Java code segment, any valid Java code segment, but remember this is a Java code segment which is not, you can't be putting, I want to define a method, no, you can't be putting a method inside a scriptlet. You remember that this is something which is anything which goes inside the service method, it is going to be included within the service method. Now, remember one more thing, so fine, this is scriptlet part, so that is clear. Now, let us move to another aspect here. We have one more thing here. We have so we got everything included. We have seen expressions, we have seen scriptlet. Both of these have an effect, both of these are affecting the translation of the service method. Fine. But other than the service method, maybe I want some more things within my translated class. It is not, oh, I would like to have some method being defined. I was mentioning you can't put even a method inside your scriptlet, because scriptlet is portion, it is a segment which goes inside the service method. It is part of a service method. So, you can't be including just a method like that, right. So, if you want, maybe you want to define a method which you can use from a scriptlet maybe, okay, or maybe even in an expression, because your method returns some value and maybe you want to include that. So, if you are interested in including some things outside of the service method, it is in that, if you visualize the translation, you have a class being defined for your JSP. Okay. When the class is defined, it has some regular methods like something equivalent of the init, something equivalent of a destroy, those would be included, fine. And then it would have this something equivalent of the service. Okay. In case of the JSP, I was mentioning about the interface called JSP page. In JSP page, we have a method called we have a method called JSP init, there are JSP destroys, those would be those can be included. But then we have the translation creating the creating a method called underscore JSP service. Okay. So, we have this, right. So, this is what would normal translation be, but I want to have some variables being declared, anything which can go inside a class definition, some variable declaration, static members, instance variables, okay. Though it is not advised to have instance variables, I want to include some constants. Okay. I would like to include some methods, static methods, anything which can go in a class definition. So, if you want to include any such things, you can use in a JSP, you can include what we call as declarations. So, in a JSP we can have declarations. A declaration is written as less than, percentage and a exclamation sign, followed by the declaration any kind of a valid member which can go in a class definition. So, this could be a static variable declaration, it could be an instance variable declaration, it could be your method, the entire method can be inside a declaration, it could be, oh, you want to have a nested class, or you could have a nested class in this. So, you can include anything which can be a member of a class, but the entire member has to be part of a single declaration. Okay. So, if you are including a class definition as a nested class, okay, put the entire class within a declaration. So, you will have a less than, percentage, exclamation, you have the entire class definition which is a nested class, and then you end your declaration with percentage greater than. So, you can have, so we have three kinds of scripting, primary scripting elements which can go in any JSP. One is expression, fine, another is scriptlet, and the third thing, both of those expression and scriptlets, they are affecting the service method. They are portions which go inside, they affect only the service method, not anything else. But then we have the declarations which get included in the JSP, in our translated class file, fine, but it is outside of the service method, other declarations which are outside of the service method. Okay. Now, coming back to the way we used expressions, the way we were using scriptlet, what can I use in an expression? Okay. Or do I only have to include some new date or some such things? How do I get some object? What kind of objects are available to me in my expressions? See, expressions, they are part of service method. Okay. If you look at the service method has got two parameters. First parameter is going to be a servlet request, or this is HTTP specific, you will have a HTTP servlet request, you will have a HTTP servlet response, those two parameters are there, fine. And normally when I have when I extend from HTTP servlet, fine, if let us compare with someone writing a servlet, someone extending from HTTP servlet, for him what is available? Oh, he uses a get servlet context, he gets servlet context, he gets so many other kinds of objects. What about a JSP, the one who is writing a JSP? Oh, he also needs those objects, fine. I might be interested in knowing what is there in a particular session object. I might be interested in knowing if there are cookies. I would be interested in knowing so many other things. I would like to be able to get some parameters maybe from the request object. Oh, these I understand are parameters. That means I would have some parameter name. Oh, what should be the parameter name? Oh, we have a standardization on the variable names, the parameter names which are being used in the translation. The parameter name for the HTTP servlet request is always going to be request in lowercase. The parameter name for HTTP servlet response is always going to be response. Oh, that means I can use them. I can use request and response as variables within my expressions, within my scriptlets. When I write a scriptlet or an expression, because they are part of the service method. Okay, so within the service method, fine, I can use this. So that means I can include this. I can have the usage of request and response. They are nothing but the request and response objects available to me for my within my expressions and scriptlets. Okay, let us see if we have any other objects available. So what has been done here is we have these objects, we call them as implicit objects. They are categorized as implicit objects. We have in fact a number of implicit objects which are available to us for use within expressions and scriptlets. Okay, because they are going to be, when the translation is done, okay, in the initial part of the translation, okay, before it starts saying out.println and including the HTML output or any expressions or the translation related to the expressions and the scriptlet, it has certain fixed kind of code which is going to declare some local variables which can be used in your expression and scriptlets, and all such variables here we call them as implicit objects. These are variables having reference to certain objects here. So, we have these variables which we refer as implicit objects. So, let us begin with let us list down all these implicit variables. What are these implicit objects which we have? First two which I have already mentioned, one is a request, another is the response. Okay. Then our normal thing is we have a writer, right? We use a writer and then on that writer we will say I want to print this. So, same thing, we have a writer being created for our JSP also, our JSP page, and this writer is a JSP writer. This JSP writer extends from the output stream. Okay. So, we have a JSP writer, it does have those methods like print and the println. So, similar to the similar to our print writer, this also has the print and println method. So, you could use them here, fine, but yes, this variable, the variable name assigned to our JSP writer is out, fine. So, we got 3 elements: request, response, out, and then next thing, what are the other things? Oh, we very commonly would like to use, suppose we are interested in the configuration object, fine. I am interested in knowing the maybe we have someone configuring our JSP here as a servlet, giving it a servlet name and giving some init parameters. Oh, we might be interested in knowing those init parameters. Oh, that means I am interested in knowing the servlet config object. I am interested in that servlet config object. So, if you are interested in servlet config object, we have that already created for us. Fine. So, we can use config, the name is config, lowercase, fine, config, fine. Similarly, if I am interested in the servlet context object, that is also made available to us. We have something called application, fine, okay. And then we have even got something called if you are interested in the current page itself, fine. What is the current page? So, we have a variable, the current page is, so we have a variable implicit object called page. This page is nothing but the current object, fine. The data type for page here is object, but basically it is nothing but it is initialized by saying okay, object page equals this. That is how the initialization has been done. That means it is nothing but it is reference to the current JSP page. Okay. And then we have something, we have a few other, there are a few other objects, but these objects are optional. They may not be available on all JSP pages, they are conditional objects. Okay. A couple of such objects which are conditional, okay, which would normally be decided by another kind of, we have something called a page directive. Fine. So, we will be looking at that page directive later on, but something we have this option of saying, okay, oh, in this page is participating in a session. If this page is participating in a session, we have the current session object available to us as session. So, any attributes from session, if you want to extract, fine, and see them, you should be able to use a implicit object called session. Fine. We have another implicit object. We have another implicit object called exception. Exception is nothing but it is not going to be available to all the, it is not going to be available to all the JSP pages. It is available only in those pages which are designed as error pages. Fine. We normally designed JSPs are nothing but they are designed for output, right. So, normally we design our JSP for normal output, but sometimes if there is an error, we do have some pages which are JSP pages which are designed as errors. Fine. They are target for errors, they are known for, they should be displaying some error. So, if I have an exception coming out somewhere, fine, any exception takes place within my service method, I would like to forward to another JSP. So, we have forwarding to another JSP, but where in the other JSP, the targeted JSP, because JSPs are designed for output, in that targeted JSP, we might be including, we might like to have information coming from that exception object. So, if you want to have some information coming from the exception object, fine, we would just simply be saying, okay, we would like to use that exception object, but for that we need to build our JSP as a error page. Fine. How to build a JSP as an error page? Oh, that would come be taken when we look at a page directive. Fine. So, we have page directives also, which will be covered in a later module. Fine. But fine. But yes, the idea here is what are the implicit objects? Oh, we have an implicit object called exception. So, we have these 7 different implicit objects. Okay. Now, what we have is we have one more implicit object, okay, which encapsulates all of these objects. Fine. So, it is just single object which has all the other objects. The other objects are request object, response object, the config object, the out object, fine, the application object. Application is our servlet context object. We have the session object, fine. We have the exception object. All of these are bundled into a single object called page context. So, page context is another implicit object which is available for use within a JSP. The life of the page context is within the JSP. Later we will be seeing there are actually certain other kinds of components which also can be included within a JSP. JSP is something like we will have a topic on a module which covers about custom tags, and in custom tags, you know, we have a Java a Java component being written, and that Java component, if it has to have access to all the implicit objects, how will it receive? Oh, not by having so many parameters, but a single parameter which would be a page context. So, that would come later anyway in a different module. But yes, the idea here is in our expressions and scriptlet, we have got 8 implicit objects which can be used there. Fine. So, we can write expression. See, that the very basic scripting elements which can go in a JSP. The basic scripting elements which go. So, what is JSP? JSP is entire thing is HTML, full of HTML, and within HTML you can embed expressions, we can embed scriptlets. Expressions are for embedding on any kind of a Java expression, scriptlet which will go as within the service method, scriptlet again going within the service method, and they are used for embedding your some kind of a Java code segments. And then we have the declarations which are used for having other kind of members which go within the JSP page within our class, fine. They are not for output. So, they may be used for other kind of declarations, declaring methods, variables and other things, fine, which will get included in this, fine. So, these are the basic scripting elements, and then we have more kind of scripting elements, like we got directives, we got tags, fine. There are custom tags, fine. There are other kinds of tags, there are custom tags which can be, there are standard tags also, there are custom tags, and then we have also got something called expression language, fine. We will be covering all of these in our subsequent modules. Okay. So, thank you.